Good evening, all, and welcome back to Dark Fears. Tonight, we journey into the frozen heart of the Adirondack Mountains. Through forgotten corners, isolated small towns, endless wilderness, and places where help does not reach, to uncover 7 of the most disturbing, real, and terrifying true horror stories ever reported from this region. These are not legends or campfire tales. These are real, documented encounters from ordinary people who entered the mountains and were never the same again. From abandoned ranger cabins to creatures that should not exist, from disappearances that defy explanation to forests that watch back. Tonight, you will hear horrors that refuse to stay buried. If you are new here, make sure to subscribe to Dark Fears for daily true horror content that will keep you up at night. Hit that notification bell so you never miss when the darkness calls. Now, let us step into the shadows of the Adirondack Mountains, where civilization ends and terror begins. My name is Ethan Caldwell, and this happened when I was 29 during a winter survey contract deep in the Adirondack Mountains. I'm a wildlife mapping technician by trade. My job is to go where other people don't, log animal movement, and stay invisible. I liked that. Silence made sense to me. The assignment sounded simple. 2 weeks near an abandoned fire lookout, cataloging wolf and moose activity. No towns for miles, no cell service, just snow, trees, and the old ranger cabin that would be my shelter. The first night felt normal. Too normal. The forest was quiet in a way that pressed against my ears, like sound itself was holding its breath. Around midnight, I heard footsteps outside the cabin, slow, deliberate, circling. Too heavy for a deer, too steady for the wind. I told myself it was an elk. Then something stopped directly outside my window and stayed there, breathing. By morning, I found tracks circling the cabin. Not hoof prints, not paws. Bare, elongated footprints pressed deep into the snow, each step far apart, like whatever made them didn't move the way we do. The stride was wrong, too long, too confident. I radioed base, static. The mountains swallowed the signal whole. The days blurred into routine, mapping routes, tagging trees, returning before dark. But every evening, the forest felt closer. Trees that hadn't been there before appeared along my trail. Landmarks shifted just enough to make me question my memory. On the 4th night, I heard it again, this time farther away, pacing me as I walked back. I stopped. It stopped. I moved. It followed. When I reached the cabin, I slammed the door and locked it, heart hammering. Then came the knock. 3 slow taps, perfectly human. And from the other side, in a voice that sounded almost like mine, it said, "Ethan, you forgot something in the woods." I didn't answer the voice. I couldn't. My throat locked as if my body understood something my mind refused to accept. No one else knew my name out here. Not the company, not the rangers, not even my family knew the exact coordinates of my camp. Yet whoever, or whatever, stood outside said it like they had always known me. The knock came again, louder this time. Wood creaked as something leaned against the door, testing it. I backed away slowly, my boots scraping the floor far too loudly in the silence. Through the thin cabin wall, I could hear breathing, ragged, excited, impatient. Then it walked away. Not toward the forest, but around the cabin, brushing against the walls, dragging fingers across the logs as if memorizing the shape of my shelter. The steps paused at the back window, where the glass was thinner. A shadow rose slowly into view. Too tall, too thin. And when the face pressed close to the glass, I realized it was smiling. But the smile didn't match the rest of its face. I didn't sleep that night. I sat with my back against the far wall, rifle in my lap, eyes fixed on the windows. Every sound felt amplified. The settling wood, the wind squeezing through cracks, my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. Just before dawn, I heard movement again. This time it wasn't outside. Footsteps echoed above me. The cabin only had one floor. Slow, deliberate steps paced across the ceiling, stopping directly over my head. Dust drifted down between the beams. Something scratched at the roof, not trying to break in, just reminding me it could. Then came the whisper, seeping through the wood like smoke. "You map us now?" Plural. When morning finally came, the tracks were everywhere. Around the cabin, on the roof, leading into the trees in dozens of directions, all identical. I packed my gear with shaking hands and made a decision I should have made days ago. I was leaving. I just didn't know if the forest would let me. I left just after sunrise, carrying only what I could run with. The forest looked different in daylight, but the unease hadn't lifted. Every tree seemed slightly bent toward the trail, as if leaning in to listen. My GPS kept glitching, spinning my direction in slow circles until I shut it off completely. An hour in, I heard footsteps behind me again. Not chasing, matching my pace exactly. When I stopped, they stopped. When I started walking, they resumed, always staying just far enough back that I couldn't see them. Then I noticed something worse. The footsteps were in front of me too. Fresh tracks appeared in the snow ahead, forming one by one, as if the ground itself was remembering where they wanted me to go. My chest tightened as the trail narrowed into a corridor of trees I didn't recognize from my map. That's when I realized the forest wasn't just surrounding me. It was guiding me. And whatever lived between the trees had decided I was done choosing my own path. The trees opened into a clearing I shouldn't have found. At its center stood an old fire lookout tower, collapsed, rusted, and half swallowed by the earth. My map showed nothing here. No trails, no structures. I stepped closer and felt the air change. Heavier, warmer, like the forest was breathing differently in this place. Beneath the tower, the snow was gone, revealing dark soil covered in deep grooves. Something had been circling this spot for years. That's when the voices started. Not one voice, many, all familiar. My mother called my name from the trees. My supervisor shouted that the extraction team had arrived. I even heard my own voice, calm and convincing, telling me to come closer, that this was where I belonged. I covered my ears and screamed, but the sound barely traveled. The clearing swallowed it whole. Behind me, branches snapped. When I turned, I saw it fully for the first time. Tall, pale, and wrong. Its face shifting, struggling to decide who it wanted to be. And it was smiling again. I ran. I didn't care where the path went anymore. I tore through the trees, lungs burning, branches clawing at my face and gear. Behind me, the forest erupted with movement. Dozens of footsteps now, not chasing, but hurting me. Every time I veered off, something crashed through the brush to steer me back. The thing screamed then, not in rage, but in delight. Its voice fractured into layers, overlapping, repeating fragments of people I loved, people I trusted. Each sound struck my head like a physical blow, filling it with memories that weren't mine, or were, but twisted. I tripped and fell hard into the snow. As I scrambled up, I felt fingers brush my boot, ice cold, too many joints. I fired the rifle blindly. The echo cracked through the woods, and for a moment, everything went still. Then the trees answered. Every trunk around me shuddered as something moved inside them, as if the forest itself had been hollowed out to make room for whatever hunted me. I wasn't running through the Adirondacks anymore. I was inside it. I burst out onto a frozen logging road just as my strength gave out. The sudden openness felt wrong, exposed, like stepping into a spotlight. My breath came in sharp, painful gasps as I collapsed to my knees. Silence. No footsteps. No voices. For a moment, I thought I'd escaped. Then I saw the tracks. They stopped at the tree line, perfectly aligned, dozens of them standing still, as if whatever followed me refused to cross the road. The air beyond the forest felt lighter, safer, human. A shape detached itself from the shadows between the trees. It didn't step forward. It just watched me, head tilted, its face now wearing something almost like disappointment. It raised a hand and pointed, not at me, but down the road. A warning. I didn't wait to understand it. I stumbled forward, following the road until my legs failed and darkness took me. When I woke up in a hospital days later, they said I was found miles outside the park, alone. But sometimes, when the room gets quiet, I still hear footsteps, waiting for me to step back off the road. The doctors said I suffered from severe hypothermia and stress-induced hallucinations. That explanation followed me home, into therapy rooms, into sleepless nights where I stared at the ceiling, waiting for it to breathe again. But hallucinations don't leave evidence. A week after I was discharged, a package arrived at my apartment. No return address. Inside was my field notebook, the one I dropped in the clearing near the collapsed tower. Mud-stained, pages warped from moisture. On the last page, beneath my final handwritten entry, something else had been added. Not ink, not blood. Pressed indentations, as if someone had written without a pen. "You map us now." The words were careful, practiced, learning. After that, things started changing. Trees outside my window seemed closer each morning. Forest sounds crept into the city at night, branches scraping concrete, leaves whispering between buildings. I tried to tell myself it was trauma. But trauma doesn't watch you sleep, and it doesn't wait patiently for you to come home. I quit my job 3 months later. Couldn't step into wooded areas anymore. Couldn't even walk through a city park without feeling the ground shift beneath my feet, guiding me somewhere I didn't want to go. Last winter, I received an email from a new mapping contractor. They were expanding surveys in the Adirondacks. Needed experienced technicians. My name had come highly recommended. Attached was a map. I recognized it immediately. It wasn't one I had ever submitted. The markings were wrong. Trails that didn't exist, clearings that shouldn't be there, all converging on a single point deep in the mountains. At the center, someone had labeled a spot in neat digital text. "You are here." That night, my phone rang. No number, no sound on the line. Just breathing, slow, patient, waiting, because the thing between the trees doesn't hunt forever. Sometimes it recruits. And one day soon, it's going to walk out of the forest, wearing my face. My name is Clara Thompson, and this happened during a solo winter hiking trip in the northern Adirondacks. I'd always loved the isolation, snow crunching beneath my boots, smoke curling from my little stove, the world reduced to frost and pine. I wanted peace, a break from the noise of the city. I had planned to spend 3 nights at an old, supposedly abandoned hunting cabin I'd found marked on an old map. When I arrived, the place was perfect. Snow draped over the roof like icing, the door slightly ajar as if welcoming me. The first night passed quietly, the kind of quiet that makes your ears ring. Around 2 a.m., I awoke to soft sounds, faint whispers. They didn't form words I recognized, just low guttural tones, almost like the walls themselves were breathing stories at me. I shook my head, telling myself it was the wind passing through the cracks. But the whispers grew louder, sharper, circling me in the dark. Something inside the cabin was alive. I tried to sleep, but the whispers persisted, punctuated by soft creaks as if someone or something was pacing just behind the walls. I pressed my back to the door, listening. The air was thick, heavy, smelling faintly of wet pine and decay. At one point, I swore I heard a voice clearly call my name, Clara. It was soft, coaxing, and wrong, like someone imitating me. My heart raced. The cabin had no other human visitors. I was alone. Desperate for a sense of control, I grabbed my flashlight and swept the room, floorboards groaning underfoot. Nothing. No one. Just the faint whisper of breath that didn't belong to me, and the shadows that flickered along the walls like liquid. I made a note to leave at first light, but something stopped me. On the table lay a small pile of snow, melted and refrozen, arranged into letters spelling "stay." And that's when I realized this cabin had been expecting me. I spent the rest of the night huddled in my sleeping bag, flashlight clutched like a weapon, listening to the walls whisper my name over and over. Every so often, the scratching sound returned, soft, deliberate, as if claws were tracing patterns into the wooden planks. My rational mind tried to explain it. Wind, settling wood, wildlife. But nothing could account for the rhythm. The scratches weren't random. They paused whenever I held my breath, then resumed when I relaxed, mocking me. By dawn, I thought I had survived the night, though every nerve was on fire. When I stepped outside, the snow surrounding the cabin had shifted. Trails I hadn't made crisscrossed in jagged patterns, leading into the forest and back to the cabin. I froze. Whoever or whatever had left them wasn't human. The prints were too long, too narrow, and the stride was impossible. And yet, there was no other disturbance. No trees broken, no animals startled. It was waiting. I decided to explore the surrounding woods during daylight, hoping distance would give me perspective. The snow muffled my steps, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being followed. Shadows seemed to flicker just beyond my vision, bending unnaturally. Trees leaned as if to peer at me, and the wind whispered in voices I almost recognized. I stumbled upon a frozen stream. Ice cracked under my boots in jagged lines, forming shapes that seemed deliberate. Then I noticed them. Tiny handprints in the snow along the bank, impossibly small but human-like, each finger ending in a pointed tip. They led back toward the cabin, looping in a perfect circle, and stopped abruptly. I returned to the cabin, heart hammering. The door was closed. I was sure I'd left it open. Snow dusted the steps, but no footprints led away from the entrance. Inside, a new message had appeared on the floor, scrawled in frost. "You are home." I realized then that leaving might never be an option. By the fifth night, the cabin no longer felt like a shelter. It had become a trap. Every creak, every whisper, every shadow seemed to pulse with intent. I could feel it watching me, reading my thoughts, learning my fears. I tried to leave, but every path I took looped back to the cabin as if the forest itself were a maze designed to hold me. Sleep became impossible. I'd lie awake listening to the walls echo names, dates, and intimate memories no one could possibly know. They whispered of my childhood, of my failures, of secrets I had never told. The air was thick, almost liquid, pressing against my skin, making it hard to breathe. One evening, I spotted a figure outside, standing at the edge of the tree line. Its outline was thin, unnaturally tall, and it swayed as if floating. Its head tilted at an impossible angle, watching me. I raised my camera instinctively, hoping for proof. When I looked at the screen, there was nothing, except for a single word appearing on the lens. Come. I didn't answer. I couldn't. Fear had rooted me to the floor, trembling. Then the whispers changed. They began repeating phrases from my own journal, which I had left by the stove. Each word I had written over the past months was now spoken aloud, in voices that weren't mine, echoing and overlapping until they became a suffocating roar. Desperation forced me to try the phone. No signal. The batteries died in minutes, though they had been fully charged. I wrapped my coat tighter and moved to the corner of the cabin, trying to hide. That's when I noticed frost forming on the inside of the window, slowly spelling letters one by one. You belong here. Panic surged, but reason battled for a fraction of a second. I grabbed my pack and tried to run. The door wouldn't open. No matter how hard I shoved, no matter how I twisted the handle, it remained frozen solid, as though the cabin had merged with the ice itself. I realized then that this place wasn't abandoned. It had been waiting for me. I slammed my fists against the door until my knuckles bled. The whispers escalated into screams, all overlapping, all urgent, echoing from every corner of the cabin. The frost on the windows crept downward, twisting into shapes. Faces I recognized, staring at me with hollow eyes. My flashlight flickered, and for a moment the shadows inside the cabin stretched into impossible forms, almost alive, pressing closer. Then I heard it, a slow, deliberate tapping on the roof, followed by faint, wet scrapes across the walls. The cabin groaned under the weight of unseen footsteps, circling above and behind me. I could smell something decaying, something warm and alive, mingled with the pine scent of the forest outside. I ran to the corner and pressed against the wall, wrapping my arms around myself. The whispers softened, almost playful. One voice, calm, patient, eerily familiar, said, "You can leave, but we will wait." And then the cabin door creaked open by itself, wide enough to show the blinding white snow outside, inviting me into a trap I couldn't see. I stumbled outside into the snow, gasping for air. The forest greeted me with silence at first, but then movement appeared at the edges of my vision. Blurred, tall figures slipping between trees, circling, keeping their distance, but never letting me escape. The wind carried the whispers now, faint but constant, weaving through the branches, my name, my fears, my regrets. As I ran, I tripped into a shallow, snow-covered ravine. When I looked up, the cabin sat behind me, closer than it should have been, almost impossibly intact. Windows glowing warmly, as if nothing had happened inside. The tracks I left behind in the snow were gone, replaced by countless tiny handprints, circling me, guiding me back. Something moved closer, gliding just above the snow. Too tall, too thin, its shadow stretching over the white landscape like ink. Its head tilted as if examining me, studying whether I would submit. I screamed, knowing the forest itself had decided I was no longer free. The cabin, and whatever waited inside, was patient, and it never forgets. Night fell faster than I could comprehend. The forest darkened, swallowing all light, and the cabin's glow now felt like a beacon of danger rather than safety. The whispers returned, layered and insistent, repeating not just my name, but phrases from my deepest fears. Alone, forever, never leave, stay with us. My lungs burned as I scrambled through knee-deep snow, knowing that no path I took would lead me to safety. Then I saw it, just beyond the tree line, a figure impossibly tall, its head cocked like a predator studying its prey. Its shadow stretched unnaturally across the snow, reaching for me. I froze. the whispers condensed into a single voice that mimicked my own, coaxing me closer. "Clara, it's your home now." I stumbled backward, my boot catching on a root. When I fell, the world shifted. The snow beneath me seemed to ripple. The shadows around me thickened, and I realized the cabin wasn't just behind me. It was everywhere. It was the forest, the snow, the air itself. And it had claimed me as its own. I don't remember how long I ran, or if I truly ran at all. Days, nights, maybe hours. The time blurred under the weight of terror. Eventually, I woke up in a small ranger station, covered in blankets, my boots wet and frozen. They said they found me wandering the forest, mumbling incoherently. But even as they led me to safety, I could hear it. A faint whisper on the wind. "We will wait." Back home, nothing was normal. Shadows in corners seemed too long, voices murmured in empty rooms, and the smell of pine and frost lingered in my apartment for weeks. I tried to convince myself it was over. But the final proof arrived in the mail. A thin layer of frost covering the inside of my window, forming letters I couldn't unsee. "You are home. I know one day the forest will call me back. It always does. And when I return, I won't walk in alone. The cabin waits, and so do they." My name is Marcus Reynolds, and this happened to me during a late autumn solo hike on the Black Bear Trail in the Adirondacks. I've been hiking since I was a teenager, always drawn to remote trails where the only sounds were wind and wildlife. I thought I knew these mountains. I thought I was prepared. I left my car at the trailhead just after sunrise, backpack loaded with essentials, and started up the narrow, winding path. The forest was alive with orange and brown leaves, but a strange silence hung beneath the canopy, heavier than usual. Birds were missing. The usual rustle of small mammals was gone. Hours into the hike, I noticed something odd. Footprints in the dirt ahead, my size, but my pace didn't match them. They moved in irregular, almost impossible patterns, stopping suddenly, then starting again in erratic loops. I called out, expecting another hiker. Nothing, just the whisper of wind through the trees. I shrugged it off as an animal trail, but the feeling of being watched wouldn't leave me. By midday, the trail began to feel unfamiliar. Landmarks I had memorized in past hikes were missing, replaced by twisted versions of themselves. A tree I knew to mark a turn had vanished, and the stream I intended to cross wasn't there. My GPS, fully charged, flickered and spun in circles. Then I heard it, a sound like footsteps, but heavier, slower, echoing from behind dense trees. I spun around. Nothing, just the forest. But every time I started walking, the sound resumed, pacing me. I tried running. It ran faster. I tried hiding behind a fallen log. The sound circled and returned. I stopped completely and called out again. My own voice seemed to be swallowed by the trees. A soft, mocking whisper replied, "Don't leave. Stay with us." The hair on my neck stood straight. I knew then this wasn't a person, wasn't an animal. Something had followed me onto the trail, and it wanted me to stay forever. I forced myself to keep moving, trying to stick to the trail I thought I knew. But the trees seemed to shift around me, bending in ways that didn't make sense. Roots twisted into shapes that looked almost like hands reaching for me. Every few steps, I glimpsed something between the trunks, tall, pale, and impossibly thin. But whenever I blinked, it was gone. My heart pounded as I stumbled across a small clearing. In the center, the ground was disturbed, churned up as though something had been digging for years. Long, narrow footprints appeared in the mud, leading both toward me and back into the woods. I froze. The prints were too long, too human-like, yet wrong. Jagged and distorted, ending in what looked like clawed toes. A whisper echoed through the clearing. "We've been waiting." It was layered, multiple voices overlapping, each one familiar, yet warped. I turned and ran, but the trees seemed to stretch, elongating the trail, trapping me in a corridor I couldn't escape. I thought I had broken free when I reached a fork in the trail. One path led uphill, the other plunged deeper into shadowed woods. I chose the uphill path, desperate for elevation and perspective. But every landmark I recognized had disappeared, replaced by gnarled trees and unnatural shadows that seemed to shift when I looked away. Then I heard it again, footsteps. Not behind me, not in front, but all around. I froze, straining to see through the dense foliage. The whispers returned, teasing me, repeating fragments of my thoughts. "Why are you alone? Come closer. You belong with us." A movement caught my eye. A figure stepped into view, a humanoid, too tall, too thin, with a face that seemed to melt in the sunlight, blank and horrifying. It didn't move toward me, yet I felt its gaze pressing into my chest, rooting me in place. I realized then that leaving the trail wasn't enough. I wasn't lost. I was being led by something that knew exactly where I was going. Panic took over. I ran blindly along the uphill path, my boots sliding on damp leaves. The forest seemed alive, the trees shifting subtly to guide me. Every step echoed unnaturally, not matching my own. And I realized the distorted footprints from earlier were keeping pace with me. I wasn't alone. I never had been. Branches snapped in ways no animal could produce. Shadows flitted at the edges of my vision, towering, elongated, and silent. Then came the whispers, now chanting, overlapping my own thoughts. "Closer. Stay. Belong." I clutched my backpack straps and screamed into the empty forest. A sudden movement made me stumble into a small hollow. In the center lay a frozen pool of water, perfectly smooth except for the reflection. I gasped. My own face stared back, but it wasn't my own. The reflection grinned, mouth impossibly wide, eyes black. The forest wasn't trying to catch me. It was showing me something, preparing me. I scrambled to my feet, my mind racing. I didn't want to look back, yet the whispers followed me relentlessly, carrying voices I recognized, friends, family, even my own mocking words. They overlapped and layered, disorienting me, erasing the line between reality and nightmare. Ahead, the trail narrowed into a corridor of tightly packed trees. The air grew thick, cold, and metallic. I could see faint movements in the corners of my eyes, figures too tall, too thin, swaying slightly as if floating just above the ground. Every instinct screamed to stop, to turn, but I forced my legs forward. Then I heard it, clear and deliberate. A soft, dry laughter. It came from directly above. I looked up, and between the branches, shadowy shapes crouched on limbs, watching me with blank, twisting faces. The forest had changed. It wasn't just following me. It had trapped me, crafting an arena for whatever it was that had been hunting hikers for years. And I realized, with horror, that leaving was no longer an option. My breath came in ragged gasps as I pushed deeper into the corridor of trees. The forest seemed to shift subtly around me, branches bending toward me, roots curling like hands to trip me. Every step I took was echoed by a sound that wasn't my own, heavy, deliberate, and wrong. Then I saw it. Just ahead, partially obscured by fogs and twisting trunks, a figure crouched low, impossibly tall and thin, its face blank except for a twisted smile. It didn't move toward me, yet the feeling of its gaze burned into my chest, heavy and inescapable. I stumbled backward and fell into a patch of thick underbrush. My flashlight skittered across the ground, illuminating dozens of tiny handprints in the dirt and leaves, circling around me in a perfect pattern. The whispers escalated, layered voices merging into a single command. "You cannot leave. This is your home now." I realized then that the trail wasn't guiding me. It was hurting me, and I was completely trapped. Desperation overtook fear. I scrambled forward, leaping over roots and broken branches, praying for any sign of the trail. The whispers became a cacophony, repeating my thoughts, my fears, my memories, until I could barely separate myself from the forest's voice. Suddenly, the trees opened into a small clearing, and I froze. In the center lay a circle of footprints, impossibly long, forming a spiral that seemed to pulse with its own rhythm. At the very center, a shadow moved, shifting, stretching, impossible to define. It wasn't fully human, yet it bore my own silhouette, distorted, mocking me. A cold wind swept through the clearing, carrying a chorus of whispers. "You belong. You belong." My stomach dropped. I realized I had been running toward it all along, and the forest had led me right to the thing that had been stalking me. Every instinct screamed to turn, but the corridor behind me had vanished. The forest wasn't letting me leave. I stood frozen, my legs refusing to move, heart hammering in my chest. The figure at the center of the spiral didn't advance, yet I felt its presence grow, pressing into my mind, shaping my fear. The whispers surged, repeating every mistake I had ever made, every secret I'd buried. I dropped to my knees, hands covering my ears, but the voices seeped into my skull, drilling into my thoughts. Then the shadow lunged, not toward me, but upward, twisting and elongating into the canopy above. The spiral of footprints glowed faintly, forming letters in the dirt. "Stay forever." I scrambled backward, but the clearing seemed endless, repeating itself, looping in impossible geometry. Every escape route vanished, replaced by more trees, more shadows, more whispers. I realized with a chill I could not run from what had been waiting for me the entire hike. The trail, the forest, the trees themselves. They were alive, and they were patient. I don't remember how I left the forest. One moment I was trapped in the clearing, the next I awoke in my car at the trailhead, engine running, snow falling silently around me. The map I had used lay on the passenger seat, folded strangely, with a new path marked in red ink, a path I had never hiked before, leading deep into the heart of the forest. My friends and family said I had wandered off and got lost. They didn't hear the whispers in my head or feel the icy press of unseen eyes from the trees. Weeks later, I received a package in the mail. Inside was my hiking journal. The last entry, which I had never written, read, "I belong here now. The trail will wait for me to return." And sometimes, when the wind blows just right, I hear it calling my name, echoing from the forest. "Come back. We are waiting." I know one day I will return, and the Black Bear Trail will not let me leave again. My name is Elena Carter, and this happened during a summer trip to Silver Pine Lake in the Adirondacks with two friends, James and Rachel. We had rented a small lakeside cabin, drawn by the promise of solitude, fishing, and star-filled nights. The first day was perfect. Sunlight dancing on water, pine trees whispering in the wind. By nightfall, though, something felt off. The forest around the lake was too silent, the usual nocturnal chorus absent. Then came the first howl, low, mournful, and human-like, echoing across the water. James laughed it off, saying it was probably a coyote. Rachel shivered, muttering that it didn't sound like any animal she'd ever heard. As darkness deepened, the howls multiplied, coming from all directions at once. They were intelligent somehow, responding to our whispers, to our laughter, even to our movements. Each one seemed to carry a warning or a message we couldn't understand. And when I looked into the forest, I realized the shadows between the trees weren't still. They were moving, circling us, observing. We tried to ignore it at first, thinking our nerves were playing tricks. But as the night progressed, the howls became closer, sharper, more deliberate. They echoed off the lake's surface, bouncing from tree to tree, always surrounding us, always just out of sight. James grabbed a flashlight and aimed toward the tree line. Shadows shifted instantly, vanishing and reappearing somewhere else. It felt like the forest itself was alive, reacting to our presence. Rachel whispered that she could hear multiple voices behind the howls, deep, distorted, whispering our names and mocking us. Then something splashed in the water. We froze. Ripples expanded across the otherwise perfectly still lake, though we saw no one, no animal. The hair on my arms stood straight, and a cold wind cut across the cabin porch, carrying a low growl that vibrated in my chest. It was hunting us. Not for food, but for fear. And the more afraid we were, the closer it drew. The night stretched on endlessly, and the howls grew more intelligent, almost conversational. They shifted from mournful cries to low, guttural commands. Every time we whispered to each other, a howl would immediately follow, as if the forest was listening, mocking our attempts at comfort. I could feel the weight of invisible eyes tracking our movements, pressing down on us with an unbearable intensity. We decided to leave the cabin, thinking that running into the forest would at least give us some control. As we stepped onto the dock, the water behind us rippled violently, though the lake remained eerily still elsewhere. Faint silhouettes moved just beneath the surface, elongated shapes gliding smoothly through dark water. Rachel screamed when a shadow broke the surface briefly, showing jagged, unnatural limbs. I realized then that the howls weren't just around us. They were coming from beneath us, from the lake itself. The forest and water were connected, alive, and whatever was hunting us controlled both. We ran back to the cabin, hearts pounding, hoping to barricade ourselves inside. But when we opened the door, the porch was empty, except for footprints. Wet, elongated, clawed prints that hadn't been there before. They led from the water to the steps and then disappeared into the shadows of the forest. The howls now came in waves, surrounding us from all sides. I could hear whispers within the calls. Our names, our fears, secrets we had never spoken aloud. The wind carried their voices, twisting them, layering them, so that I couldn't tell if the sound was coming from outside or inside. James tried calling for help, but the phone was dead. No signal. Rachel suggested we jump into the lake and swim for the opposite shore. But as soon as we stepped onto the dock, ripples formed around our feet and ghostly hands seemed to rise from the water, dragging shadows across the surface. I realized then that the lake itself was a predator, patient, intelligent, and far older than any human could understand. We barricaded ourselves inside the cabin, pushing tables and chairs against the door. The howls didn't pause. They circled the structure, bouncing off the trees and the lake, layering on top of each other until they became a deafening chorus. Every window shook with the force of unseen blows, and shadows flitted across the walls, stretching and twisting as if alive. I could feel something pressing against the thin wooden walls, cold and heavy, trying to break through. James grabbed a lantern, shining it toward the corners of the room. The light revealed faint, wet footprints that had appeared inside the cabin, elongated, clawed, leading from the floorboards into the corners, then vanishing into the darkness. Rachel whimpered, pointing at the lake. On the water, shadows coalesced into vague humanoid forms, towering and swaying as if testing their reach. The whispers carried now, soft and intimate. Join us. Forever. It's so warm. I realized we weren't just being hunted. We were being chosen, and the lake had already decided our fate. Hours passed like minutes. The howls never ceased, and the whispers inside the cabin grew clearer. They spoke of memories, desires, fears. Each one was a lure, a promise, coaxing us into submission. I pressed my back to the wall, trying to make sense of it all. Then the lantern flickered and died. Darkness engulfed us completely, but I could still see the shadows. They moved independently of any light, stretching across walls and ceiling. From the lake came a splash, a massive shape, taller than a man, sliding across the surface with a wet, scraping sound. The water roiled unnaturally, rising slightly as if alive, forming a vague, towering figure that leaned toward the cabin. Rachel screamed. James tried to push her behind him, but the shadows followed, creeping along walls, wrapping around our legs. I could feel the icy touch on my skin, smell the water rising, sense the hunger. I understood then. The lake didn't just want to scare us. It wanted us in its depths, and it would not take no for an answer. We knew we couldn't stay in the cabin forever. The walls groaned under the pressure of unseen weight, the howls now accompanied by splashes from the lake, as if the water itself was surging toward us. I grabbed James and Rachel, insisting we leave, even if it meant plunging into the dark forest. As we stepped outside, the world seemed to twist. Trees bent toward us, snowless ground warping under our feet, and the lake rippled unnaturally, sending sprays of water high into the air without wind. Shadowy forms swirled across the surface, elongated humanoids, some submerged, some rising to observe. The whispers followed us, layering over one another, repeating everything we had said, turning our own voices against us. A figure emerged from the water near the dock, tall, dripping, inhuman, its head tilted as it watched us, silent, waiting. I realized the howls weren't warnings, they were invitations. Every instinct screamed to run, but even as we sprinted into the forest, I knew we had already been marked. Branches tore at our clothes and faces as we ran blindly through the dense forest. The whispers followed, now overlapping with guttural growls from unseen mouths. Every path seemed to loop back on itself, as if the forest had become a labyrinth. Then we reached a clearing, and the lake appeared again, impossibly close, even though it had been behind us moments ago. The water churned violently, tall shadows rising and twisting above the surface, reaching toward us with long, clawed limbs. The howls had grown into a deafening roar, echoing off every tree, every rock, every shadow. I stumbled to the ground, unable to move, and watched as one shadow slowly approached, gliding over the snow and mist, its elongated face twisted into a grin that mirrored my own terror. Rachel and James were behind me, paralyzed by fear. The whispers formed words we could not ignore. It's your time. Join us. I understood then that the lake, the forest, the shadows, they were all one, and they never let go. I couldn't move. The forest and lake seemed alive, closing in around us, and the shadows advanced, gliding silently over snow and water. The howls now formed a chorus, each one carrying my own voice, twisting my words into something unrecognizable, something dark. My heart pounded as I realized we had no escape. Every path, every clearing, every familiar tree had been replaced by this labyrinth of terror. Suddenly, a shadow lunged from the lake's edge, taller than any human, dripping with black water. It stopped just short of us, and the whispers condensed into a single, chilling phrase. "Stay with us. Forever." James screamed, but the sound was swallowed immediately, replaced by a howl that mimicked his voice perfectly. Rachel clung to me, tears streaming, whispering that we had to fight it. But how do you fight a lake, a forest, a shadow that moves on its own? The realization hit me like ice. Silver Pine Lake doesn't just kill you. It takes you, reshapes you, and feeds off the fear of the living. The next morning, I woke on the cabin porch, drenched and shivering. James and Rachel were gone. The lake was calm, the forest silent, as if nothing had happened. My phone had signal again, but when I called for help, nobody believed my story. Weeks later, I returned to Silver Pine Lake alone, determined to understand. The cabin was abandoned, decayed, and the water lapped lazily against the shore. Yet, in the shadows of the trees, I glimpsed movement, elongated, pale, watching me. A faint howl rose from the lake, carrying the voices of James and Rachel, twisted into words I could never forget. "We belong here now. You will too." I left immediately, never looking back. But sometimes, when I hear the wind through the pines, or the faint ripple of water, I feel the pull of Silver Pine Lake. The whispers calling my name, reminding me that it waits, patient and eternal. I know one day I may return, and when I do, it will not let me leave again. My name is Ethan Hayes, and this happened when I explored an abandoned iron mine deep in the Adirondack Mountains. I've always been drawn to forgotten places, to the thrill of discovering what history has left behind. The mine had been closed for decades, its entrance framed by rusted tracks and a collapsed wooden scaffold, warning everyone to stay away. Despite the warnings, I couldn't resist. I brought my flashlight, a rope, and a small camera to document my exploration. The first steps inside were ordinary: the smell of damp earth, the echoes of dripping water. But soon, the air grew heavy, thick with something I couldn't identify. Shadows seemed to stretch longer than they should, moving slightly even when I stayed still. Hours passed, and I noticed scratches on the walls, fresh scratches, not decades old. I called out, expecting perhaps a fellow explorer, but only my voice returned to me, distorted, echoing strangely in the tunnels. Then I heard a whisper behind me, soft but clear. "You shouldn't be here." I forced myself to move deeper into the mine, my flashlight cutting through the darkness in narrow cones of light. The walls felt close, almost pressing in on me, and the ground was uneven, slick with moisture. Every sound I made, footsteps, the scrape of my rope, echoed strangely, as if the mine itself were listening. Then I heard it again, a faint shuffle behind me, too deliberate to be a falling rock. I spun around with my flashlight, but saw nothing. The whispers returned, more insistent this time, carrying a tone of mockery. "You can't leave? It's too late." A cold gust swept through the tunnel, extinguishing my flashlight. I fumbled to turn it back on, heart hammering. When it flickered to life again, I saw a shadow at the far end of the tunnel. Tall, indistinct, and impossibly still, its shape shifting as if it wasn't entirely bound to the physical world. I realized then that the mine didn't just keep secrets. It kept watchers, I tried to convince myself it was my imagination, a trick of the dim light and the isolation. But the air grew colder, heavier, making each breath feel like inhaling stone. The shadow didn't move, yet it seemed to shift as I took steps closer. My flashlight flickered violently, throwing the walls into chaotic, twisting shapes. Then came a sound that froze my blood. A scraping, slow and deliberate, moving along the walls toward me. I stumbled back, tripping over loose rocks, and the shadow seemed to advance with every step I took. I called out, my voice echoing oddly, almost as if the mine itself were answering, distorting my words. Stay. Forever. Panic surged. I realized the mine had its own rhythm, a consciousness I could neither see nor touch. It wasn't simply abandoned, it was alive, feeding on fear, shaping the shadows into something predatory. I pressed forward anyway, my curiosity overpowering my terror, stepping into a side tunnel where the air was darker, thicker, and alive with whispers. The side tunnel twisted unnaturally, like the mine itself was reshaping its interior. The walls curved inward, enclosing me in a suffocating embrace. The whispers became intelligible, repeating fragments of my own thoughts, fears I hadn't shared with anyone. You will never leave. This is home now. I shined my flashlight ahead, and the beam revealed more shadows, clustered in corners, forming vaguely humanoid shapes. They didn't step forward, yet I felt their intent, a patient menace pressing toward me. Each shadow seemed connected, a collective consciousness born from decades of miners' fear, accidents, and despair. My heart pounded as I moved forward, trying to find the main shaft and the exit I had memorized from old maps. But the passage twisted again, ending in a dead end I didn't recognize. On the wall in front of me, scratches formed letters. You belong to us now. I dropped my flashlight, and the tunnel plunged into complete darkness, the whispers circling me, enveloping me. The mine had claimed me as its own visitor, its own prey. I scrambled to pick up my flashlight, hands trembling, but the beam barely pierced the darkness. The whispers had grown louder, overlapping, layering, repeating my deepest fears back to me in distorted voices. Every instinct screamed to run, yet my legs refused to cooperate, rooted in a terror I could barely comprehend. Then I saw movement, a subtle swaying, like smoke shaped into a human figure, rising from the floor ahead. The shadows converged, twisting together, forming something taller, darker, more imposing than anything I had imagined. It didn't speak, yet its presence communicated its intentions with suffocating clarity. I was being hunted. I forced myself to move forward, toward what I hoped was the main shaft. But the mine had shifted. Tunnels I remembered from maps no longer existed. The mine itself had rewritten its layout, herding me toward the shadows. My flashlight flickered again, illuminating dozens of elongated claw-like marks along the walls, pointing toward the darkness ahead. I realized with chilling clarity that the mine didn't just hold shadows, it created them. And I was now part of its story. Every step I took echoed unnaturally, repeating back to me in whispers, distorted and mocking. The mine had become a labyrinth, alive and sentient, feeding on my fear. Shadows flickered at the edge of my vision, forming humanoid shapes with impossible angles, then vanishing whenever I tried to look directly at them. I reached a wide chamber, and my flashlight illuminated the far wall just as a massive shadow surged across it, moving faster than any human could. The wall itself seemed to ripple, as if the mine's very stone had come alive. I froze, realizing that the shadow wasn't just moving, it was shaping the environment around it, bending the mine to its will. Then I felt a cold pressure on my back, as if someone or something was leaning into me. The whispers condensed into a single chilling phrase. Stay. Become one with the mine. I turned abruptly, but there was nothing. Just the darkness and the faint outlines of figures forming and dissolving in the corners. I knew then that the mine would not let me leave easily, if at all. I pressed onward, each step a battle against the oppressive darkness and the whispers that clawed at my mind. The mine seemed to breathe around me, inhaling and exhaling in a rhythm that made the walls pulse like living flesh. Shadows stretched unnaturally along the tunnel, sometimes splitting into multiple forms before merging again. Ahead, I saw an opening, a larger chamber with broken beams and collapsed rock, the faintest light filtering from cracks above. Relief surged through me, but it was short-lived. The shadows surged toward me, moving faster than I could react, stretching their arms like black tendrils, brushing against my shoulders, my arms, leaving icy trails of despair. The whispers intensified, calling my name in voices I recognized from my past, friends, family, and strangers I'd never met, each distorted, each pleading for me to stop, to surrender. I realized then the mine wasn't just a place, it was a predator. And I was running straight into its lair, drawn by its hunger and my own curiosity. The chamber opened fully, and I could see the extent of the devastation. Collapsed beams, jagged rock, and water pooling in low areas. Shadows moved across the walls like living ink, shifting shape, forming faces that leered and twisted. I could hear whispers echoing off the ceiling. You belong. You cannot leave. Join us. A massive shape emerged from the darkness ahead, towering, humanoid, but wrong in every way. Too long, too thin, limbs bending at impossible angles. It glided silently across the chamber, and the smaller shadows swarmed around it like obedient minions. My flashlight barely illuminated it, but the sheer presence made my knees buckle. I understood that this was the heart of the mine, the entity that had absorbed decades of fear, pain, and tragedy, growing stronger with each visitor. And now, it had noticed me. The whispers became a roar, and the walls seemed to close in, pushing me toward the entity, toward a fate I couldn't comprehend. I realized escape would not be simple. It would be a fight for my very soul. The shadows surged as I stepped closer to the massive figure. My flashlight flickered, then went out entirely, plunging the chamber into suffocating darkness. I could feel the cold pressure of the entity behind and around me, a weight that seemed to bend the very air. Every step I took echoed, as if the mine itself were mocking me, repeating my movements in distorted echoes. Then I tripped over a jagged rock and fell forward. When I looked up, the figure loomed directly over me. Impossibly tall, its limbs writhing like smoke. Its presence pressed into my chest, the whispers now inside my head, repeating every fear and regret I had ever had. You will stay. Forever. I scrambled backward, desperate, until my hand touched a faint glimmer. Sunlight streaming through a crack above. The mine had one flaw. It could shape shadows, but not light. I lunged toward it, feeling the tendrils of darkness claw at my body, nearly pulling me back into the black abyss. I scrambled through the crack of light, barely fitting through the narrow opening. The mine seemed to shudder as I emerged, the whispers fading, replaced by the natural sounds of the Adirondack forest. I collapsed outside, gasping for air, shaking and drenched in sweat. The mine loomed silently behind me, dark and patient, as if nothing had happened. James and Rachel were never with me. The mine had claimed them long ago. I called for help, but no one could hear the stories I had lived, the darkness I had felt. Weeks later, I returned cautiously, notebook in hand, hoping to map the mind properly, to understand what had nearly taken me entirely. The entrance was the same, yet somehow different, more oppressive, as if it remembered me. I never entered again. But on still nights, when the wind rattles the trees or water drifts from old creeks, I swear I hear the whispers, echoing, "You cannot leave. The mine will wait." The shadow in the old mine is patient, and it always remembers. My name is Marcus Reed, and this happened during a hiking trip deep in the Adirondack Mountains with two friends, Laura and Kevin. We were following a lesser-known trail rumored to showcase the most breathtaking views of the mountains, untouched and wild. The sun was warm, the air crisp, and the scent of pine filled our lungs, at least at first. By midday, the trail became narrower, overgrown, and the forest around us thickened unnaturally. Birds had vanished, and the usual sounds of wildlife disappeared entirely. It was like stepping into another world, or one where life had retreated. Kevin, the most experienced hiker among us, suggested we mark our path carefully, but the forest seemed to resist our efforts. Every marker we left disappeared or was moved when we turned our backs. Then Laura screamed. Not a yell, but a sharp, unnatural cry that echoed unnervingly through the trees. When I turned to her, she was frozen, staring at a section of the trail that seemed to shimmer and distort, like reality itself had warped. I ran to Laura, but as I approached, the shimmering section of the trail disappeared. She blinked, confused, shaking her head, claiming she saw nothing. Kevin tried to reassure us, but the air had shifted. It felt charged, heavy, unnatural. The forest had become a maze, one that seemed to move subtly when we weren't looking. We continued cautiously, each step echoing louder than it should, leaves rustling with unnatural precision. Then Kevin vanished. One moment he was ahead checking a map, and the next, silence. I called his name, my voice trembling, but only the forest answered, mocking, distorted. Laura screamed again, pointing to a cluster of trees where Kevin had stood. Now there was nothing but an empty patch of forest floor. Panic set in. Every instinct screamed at us to leave, yet every turn in the trail seemed to lead us deeper, not out. Shadows stretched unnaturally, moving just beyond our vision. And with each passing minute, the forest's whispers grew clearer, repeating fragments of our conversation back to us in a distorted, mocking tone. We tried retracing our steps, but the forest had changed. Trees I knew we had passed were now in different positions, roots twisted unnaturally, and every rock and fallen log seemed displaced. The trail markers we left behind had vanished entirely. It was as if the forest itself had swallowed Kevin, rewriting the path behind us to trap us inside. Laura clung to my arm, trembling. Every time we paused, the whispers returned, echoing fragments of our own conversations, distorted and menacing. You cannot leave. You belong. Join us. The shadows flickered along the periphery of our vision, just beyond where the trees blocked the sunlight. I could feel them moving closer with every heartbeat, patient, deliberate. Then I heard a voice. Kevin's, or what sounded like him, but warped, metallic, and distant. It called our names over and over, beckoning us toward a thicket where no trail existed. Despite every instinct telling me to run the other way, curiosity and fear compelled me to follow, dreading what I would find. We pushed through the thicket, the branches clawing at our clothes and faces, leaves rustling with unnatural whispers. The forest seemed alive, pressing inward, disorienting us with every step. When we emerged, we found a clearing that wasn't on any map. a hollow surrounded by massive pine trees that twisted unnaturally toward the center. There we saw Kevin, or what looked like him. His body was unnaturally still, limbs bent in wrong angles, and his head tilted back, mouth open in a silent scream. Shadows moved beneath him, rising from the forest floor like smoke, wrapping around him, making him sway slightly as if the wind controlled his form. The whispers surged into a roar, filling my mind with fragments of Kevin's voice, twisted and pleading. "Help me. Join us." Laura screamed, and the shadows turned toward us, flickering along the edges of our vision. I realized then that the forest wasn't just hiding people. It was reshaping them, absorbing them into its darkness, turning them into something else entirely. We couldn't stay in the clearing. The forest seemed to pulse with life, shadows writhing and stretching as if it knew our fear. Every instinct screamed to run, yet the twisted trees and undergrowth blocked our path. The whispers returned, louder now, repeating Kevin's distorted voice over and over. "You cannot leave. Join us." I grabbed Laura's hand, and we stumbled blindly into the darkness, branches tearing at our clothes and skin. Every turn led us deeper into the forest, paths looping back on themselves, mocking our attempts to escape. I realized that the forest wasn't random. It was shaping itself, guiding us, herding us like prey. Ahead, a faint glow appeared. At first, I thought it was sunlight. But as we approached, I saw it wasn't natural. The glow came from a cluster of shadows moving together, forming a wall that pulsed and shifted, absorbing the light from our surroundings. The forest had prepared us for something, and I had no idea if we would survive what awaited. We pressed forward, our hearts hammering as the shadows writhed like living smoke. The glowing mass ahead now took form, a distorted humanoid shape, taller than any human, limbs bending impossibly, face obscured but somehow aware of us. It didn't move toward us, yet I felt its presence pressing, suffocating, commanding. The whispers merged with Kevin's voice, and I realized the figure wasn't just a shadow. It was made from him and countless others, those who had vanished on these trails over decades. It pulsed, a living amalgam of fear and despair. Laura sobbed, urging me to turn back, but the forest offered no paths, only a widening void of darkness and twisted trees. I knew then that the Adirondacks didn't just hide people, they claimed them, reshaped them, and made them part of the forest's consciousness. Every scream we'd heard over the years, every vanished hiker, had become part of this entity, waiting patiently for the next victims. I understood the horrifying truth. We were already too late. We had no choice but to move forward. The shadow figure pulsed with a rhythm, almost like a heartbeat. And with each pulse, the trees around us seemed to lean closer, closing in. The whispers became a deafening chorus, merging every voice of those who had vanished before, each one pleading, begging, mocking us. My mind ached trying to process it all, but fear propelled me onward. Then I felt a tug at my arm. I spun around, expecting Laura, but no one was there. The shadows had reached for us, stretching long, claw-like limbs that grazed our skin with icy, suffocating pressure. The glowing figure ahead remained still, but its presence dominated everything. Every instinct screamed to run, yet every path seemed to loop back toward it, guiding us like prey toward a predator, waiting patiently for the final strike. I realized we weren't being chased. We were being corralled. The forest had decided where we would end. The clearing ahead was impossible to ignore. The glowing figure stood at its center, surrounded by faint outlines of other distorted humanoid shadows. Remnants of lost hikers, their forms twisted, frozen in agony. The whispers now formed words, repeating over and over. "Join us. You cannot leave. You are ours." I grabbed Laura's hand tightly, forcing her to move despite her screams. We circled the edge of the clearing, searching for any escape, but the shadows seemed to anticipate every move. The glowing figure raised a long, distorted arm toward us, and with it, the smaller shadows rippled outward like waves, pressing invisibly against our senses, feeding off our fear. Every thought, every memory, felt vulnerable under its gaze. I realized the forest didn't just claim people. It reshaped them, absorbed their fear, and made them part of its will. And now, it had singled us out. There was no reasoning, no pleading. Survival meant outrunning not just shadows, but the very consciousness of the Adirondack wilderness itself. Desperation drove us forward. I grabbed Laura's hand and ran, following a faint glimmer of sunlight filtering through the dense canopy, hoping it would lead to the trail's end. The shadows surged behind us, tendrils brushing against our backs and shoulders, leaving icy trails that burned with panic. The whispers intensified, repeating Kevin's voice and countless others, begging us to stop, to surrender, to become part of them. Branches clawed at our faces, roots seemed to rise to trip us. Yet somehow we pushed onward, hearts pounding. The forest was alive, reshaping itself to contain us, but my instinct screamed to move, to fight, to survive. The glowing figure watched from the clearing, its presence pressing like a storm cloud over the entire forest. Finally, I saw a familiar landmark, a large boulder at the edge of the trail. We sprinted toward it, limbs burning, lungs screaming. Behind us, the whispers faltered, the shadows recoiling slightly, as if reluctant to release their hold. We were almost free. Almost. We burst through the trees and onto the familiar section of the trail. The shadows retreated, flickering and dissolving into the forest floor, and the whispers became faint, fading echoes. Laura collapsed, trembling, tears streaking her dirt-covered face, while I pulled her close, gasping for air. Kevin was gone, absorbed completely by the forest, and I realized the Adirondacks had claimed yet another life. We stumbled down the trail until we found a ranger station and finally told someone our story. They were skeptical at first, dismissing it as stress and exhaustion. But the fear in our eyes and the strange markings on our arms and clothing made them pause. Even now, I cannot forget that clearing, those glowing figures, or the feeling that the forest watches and waits. I know the Adirondack Mountains still hold Kevin and many others, trapped in shadow, whispering to the next hikers who wander too deep. Some trails are not meant to be walked. Some forests do not forgive. My name is Isabel Carter, and this happened during a weekend getaway with friends to a remote cabin on Blackwater Lake in the Adirondacks. We had rented it through an old listing, the kind that promised seclusion and breathtaking views. But the photos didn't capture the eerie stillness that clung to the place. The lake was black as ink, perfectly still, reflecting the surrounding pines like a mirror of shadows. From the moment we arrived, something felt off. The cabin's windows were clouded with age, and the door creaked unnaturally when we opened it. Inside, the air smelled of damp wood and something else, something metallic, faint but unsettling. My friends laughed nervously, trying to brush off the feeling. But I couldn't shake the sensation that we were being watched, that the cabin itself held a memory we weren't meant to disturb. That first night, I awoke to soft tapping on the wooden walls. I thought it was the wind, until I heard a whisper from the corner of the room. "You shouldn't be here." I shook off the cold fear and went to investigate the tapping. The cabin was empty. Yet the sound persisted, coming from the far corner where the shadows pooled thickest. I shined my flashlight, but the beam seemed to bend, distorted, unable to fully illuminate the area. The whisper returned, clearer this time. "You cannot leave. Not now." My friends remained asleep, unaware of the growing unease. I checked the perimeter outside, the lake calm and black, the forest silent except for the faint rustling of leaves, though no wind blew. That silence was what unnerved me most. Too complete, unnatural, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Later, we gathered in the cabin's living room, trying to laugh off the tension. But I noticed scratches on the floorboards that hadn't been there before, forming shapes I didn't recognize. They seemed to point toward the lake. A chill ran down my spine as I realized we were not alone, and the cabin and the lake was aware of our presence. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined dark shapes moving across the walls, shifting just beyond the edges of the cabin's dim light. The whispers returned, insistent, echoing. "The water remembers. You cannot hide." I tried to convince myself it was a dream, that the isolation had played tricks on my mind. But deep down, I knew it was real. Around midnight, I heard footsteps outside, crunching softly on the frost-hardened dirt. My flashlight barely penetrated the darkness beyond the cabin porch, but I could see ripples across the lake, though the wind was still. The water seemed to pulse unnaturally, reflecting shapes that weren't ours, figures hunched at the edge, watching, waiting. I called out to my friends, but my voice sounded wrong, distorted, echoing back to me from the water in multiple layers, overlapping with whispers of old voices. The lake wasn't calm anymore. It was alive, responding, aware of our trespass, or of our... I crept to the porch, heart hammering, peering at the water. The shapes moved closer, indistinct yet humanoid, limbs bending at unnatural angles. Their presence radiated an intelligence, as if the lake itself had created them to watch, to judge, to claim. The whispers crescendoed into a deafening chorus, repeating our names in tones that weren't human, each syllable scraping against my mind. Suddenly, the wooden planks beneath me groaned, and I nearly fell backward as a shadow rose from the lake, stretching upward with a motion that defied physics. Its face was obscured by darkness, but I felt its gaze pierce through me, weighing my soul, reading my every thought. Laura screamed from inside the cabin, breaking my trance. I realized then that the shadows weren't just in the lake. They were entering the cabin, creeping along the walls, pooling in corners, searching. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, but the forest, the cabin, and the lake had conspired, and I was trapped in a nightmare that didn't belong to this world. I stumbled back into the cabin, my heart pounding, trying to calm Laura, who was shaking uncontrollably. The shadows inside moved independently, stretching along the walls, pooling in the corners, and following us with an almost sentient intent. The whispers had changed. They weren't just warnings anymore. They were commands. "Come to us. The lake waits. You cannot escape." I grabbed a flashlight and shined it toward the window overlooking the lake. The black water had shifted. Dozens of shadowy figures floated at the edge, swaying in unison like a crowd of mournful spirits. Their faces were featureless, yet somehow familiar, contorted with sorrow and rage. Every instinct screamed for me to run, but the cabin doors groaned as if the structure itself resisted us leaving. Then, a hand, pale, almost translucent, pressed against the glass from the outside, followed by another. The whispers became louder, almost deafening, urging us toward the water. I realized the lake wasn't just haunted, it was alive. And it wanted us, demanded us, and had been waiting for our arrival. We backed away from the window, trying to gather our courage. But the shadows pressed closer, moving faster, reshaping themselves as if mocking our fear. The whispers now merged with cries, overlapping voices of people long gone, distorted and pleading. Join us, stay with us, forever. I realized there was only one way to survive: confrontation. Grabbing a small lantern, I stepped onto the porch, shining its flickering light directly at the lake. The shadowy figures recoiled slightly, almost as if hurt by the warmth. The largest figure rose from the water, a towering, twisted humanoid, limbs bending impossibly, its presence radiating a crushing weight of malice. Laura clung to my arm, terrified, but I could see the fear mirrored in her eyes. Every instinct screamed to run. Yet the cabin seemed to quiver, as though warning us that leaving would provoke the entity further. The lake pulsed, alive, and I understood. The cabin, the water, and the shadows were all connected. A single consciousness, patient and ancient. And it had taken notice of us. The towering shadow wavered, its form pulsing as if testing our resolve. The whispers intensified, overlapping voices now a chorus of desperation and malice. Join us. The water waits. You cannot leave. My hand shook on the lantern, the light flickering violently, casting long, grotesque shadows across the cabin walls. Laura grabbed my arm, pleading for me to retreat, but I knew hesitation would mean surrender. I held the lantern high, forcing the light toward the lake. The water rippled violently, black shapes recoiling and twisting, screeching silently in the air around us. I realized the entity drew strength from darkness, from fear, from hesitation. Only the light could keep it at bay. Suddenly, the shadows surged toward us, writhing like living smoke, reaching through the porch railings, clawing at our arms. The air turned icy, every breath labored. I knew this was the moment that would decide whether we became part of Blackwater Lake's legion or escaped its grasp. The entity's gaze pinned me, its awareness pressing into my mind like a storm. I forced myself to take a step forward, lantern shaking but unwavering. The shadows recoiled slightly, their cohesion faltering as if the light burned them. The largest figure, the heart of the entity, let out a silent roar that vibrated through the air and into my chest. The water churned, black waves colliding with the cabin's foundation. Yet the light held. Laura and I backed carefully toward the trail, keeping the lantern between us and the lake. The whispers tried to confuse us, calling our names, showing fleeting visions of our friends being dragged into the water, their faces twisted in silent screams. Every instinct told me to run blindly, but I forced my mind to focus, step by step, toward safety. The entity pulsed, a wave of darkness that threatened to engulf everything. Yet the lantern's light carved a small sanctuary, a path through the blackness. I realized then that the entity thrived on isolation and fear, and the only way to survive was to maintain courage, to hold the light, and to never look away. Step by step, we made our way down the narrow forest trail, leading away from the cabin, lantern held high. The shadows recoiled but did not vanish entirely, their tendrils stretching toward us as if reluctant to let us go. The whispers followed, fading and rising with the wind. You can't leave. The lake remembers. You belong to us. Every snapping twig and rustling leaf made us flinch. The trees leaned closer, black branches reaching out as if to grab our ankles. Laura stumbled, and I yanked her back upright just as a shadow lunged at the trail ahead, vanishing when it reached the lantern's light. The lake loomed behind us, black and still, as if nothing had moved. But I knew better. Its gaze followed, patient and eternal. Finally, after what felt like hours, we emerged onto the main trail, the forest lightening and the air warming. The shadows receded entirely, but their memory clung to us, a weight in our chests that would never fade. We had escaped, barely. By sunrise, the cabin and Blackwater Lake were behind us, hidden once again by trees and mist. The shadows were gone, but the weight of what we had witnessed remained. Every time I close my eyes, I see the towering figure, its twisted limbs silhouetted against the black water, and I hear the whispers echoing in my mind. We reached the ranger station and reported what had happened. Officials were polite but skeptical, noting that the cabin had been empty for years and that no record existed of anyone disappearing there recently. Yet the scratches on the floorboards, the strange residue near the windows, and the palpable fear in our voices silenced any further doubt. I will never return to Blackwater Lake. The Adirondacks keep their secrets well, and some places are better left alone. The cabin waits silently, the lake patient, and the shadows will always remember those who trespass into their domain. Some nights, I swear I still hear whispers. You cannot leave. We will wait. As our journey through the darkest corners of the Adirondack Mountains comes to an end, we are reminded that these forests are more than just wilderness. They are living, breathing entities that hold the memories of those who vanished before. From the vanishing trails that swallow hikers whole, to the Blackwater lakes that pulse with ancient darkness, and the cabins that whisper secrets no one should hear, every story reveals a chilling truth. Some places are meant to remain unexplored. The mountains do not forgive curiosity, and the shadows are always waiting, patient, watching. These tales are not legends or campfire tales. They are the documented, terrifying experiences of those who survived and those who did not. Remember, the next time you wander into the Adirondacks, the forest may seem silent, but the darkness is alive, and it never forgets. Thanks for watching. This was Dark Fears.